There is no such thing as a single-sex space at University of Leeds. They decided that they found me guilty of bringing LSR into disrepute, but they didn't tell me how I'd done that. I was told that I'd been suspended from my committee position and from my membership of Leeds Student Radio. It was a tricky time because I didn't know who I could speak to. And now we have a really great network of students who are gender critical, many of whom are facing their own cancellations. Places, including universities, are trying to continue to pretend that it isn't the law. It is very clear what the law is now, and no one can pretend otherwise. I was also told that I needed to remove myself from LSR platforms, including group chats. So it was very clear that it was about my views, however much they say that it wasn't. Of course, I do want to convince people that this is the correct side.
Yeah.
All I want is to debate with people about this topic.
How's it going, Connie?
I'm good, thank you, Sana. How are you?
Yeah, good. What's changed since we've last spoken? Because we spoke, it was around December, January time. And at that point, we didn't have the Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah.
But just in general, before we go into that, what's changed in your world?
Well, I finished my degree now, which is great. I've continued to be vocal about women's rights and free speech at universities. And yeah, like you said, I think the biggest thing that has changed is the Supreme Court ruling, although it hasn't had the effect that I think a lot of, it is a massive line in the sand, in the sense that it is very clear what the law is now and no one can pretend otherwise.
Right.
Although places, including universities, are trying to continue to pretend that it isn't the law. But it hasn't had the effect on free speech to do with gender critical views that we might have liked it to. Because I remember on the day, and since, lots of people have said that the ruling was a vindication for a lot of women who had faced discrimination for their gender critical views. But actually, now I think because of the ruling, it's because of the backlash to the ruling, it's become perhaps in some settings even harder to say that you agree with it, for example, even though it's the law.
Right.
So yeah.
What's it been like at university? Because you still would have been at university when the ruling happened. Did you see more people speak up? Because last time we spoke, one of the issues we talked about was at your university, there were few people that would actually speak up and have the courage to say what you would say. Did that change after the ruling?
So the ruling happened during the Easter holidays, so I wasn't in Leeds at the time. But when I went back, since we last spoke, I've met quite a few female students and male students at the University of Leeds who are gender critical, and that's been really great because Amazing. I think when we last spoke, that was around Christmas time and the second semester hadn't started. I knew of no one who was also struggling with the fact that they felt like they couldn't voice their opinions on this topic. And since coming back to uni, I'm now in contact with many students at Leeds who agree with me. And it's not about being in agreement, because that sounds like, I want to find people who agree with me. Of course, that's great, because it makes me feel less alone. But also, it's good for those students too, because they, up until this point, have felt like there isn't anyone else who thinks this way.
Right.
And now we have a really great network of students who are gender critical, many of whom are facing their own cancellations. There were a couple of times when, this was after Easter, after the Supreme Court ruling, when I was sat in the student union, and I had twice it happened where I had students on two different occasions come up to me and said that they agreed with me, which was really lovely. But when someone approaches you like that when you're sat on your own, it's like, what is this person gonna say? But yeah, it's been really lovely. And some of one person who came to speak to us, it was really emotional because she hadn't met anyone else who she could speak to about it. And so it's been really rewarding because towards the end of my degree, I've now got a group of friends at uni who we've been out together a couple of times.
Amazing.
And so we're all in contact, and we've made friends through the fact that we don't have anyone else that we can openly discuss our opinions, not just about gender, but about anything else that might be seen as controversial within university.
Are they as vocal as you? Would they be as publicly about?
Some of them, yeah.
Okay.
And I would say that the ones that are more vocal tend to be boys, and that is quite understandable, and has been my experience throughout school and university that boys don't necessarily, and I'm not saying that they don't at all, because I know that they have, but it's the cancellation sort of comes from, I would say, predominantly within female groups of friends. If
Right.
you're a girl and your friends are female, like for example, my male friends are tend to be far more accepting and find it quite cool that I have an opinion that other
Yeah.
students wouldn't. But amongst girls, it's a lot harder to gauge what's going
Right.
to happen because there isn't this sort of it's something within female friendship groups that you sort of move as one, and if someone steps out of line, that can be quite difficult sometimes, regard like whatever it's about, whether it's
Yeah.
an opinion or you know you have to take someone's side when you fall out with each other, and that doesn't seem to happen as much within male friendship groups.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think men just generally probably they're a bit more like disagreeable and they'll like just
Yeah.
debate and argue with each other. It's normal for like to think of my friends, like we give each other so much like abuse like
Mm.
24/7. I'm sure like when my wife says, I don't think she'd be able to say what like we say to our friends, like I say to my friends on a regular basis and vice versa. So that probably helps. But it's interesting because I was speaking to Graham Linhan, was one of the people who was
Mm.
really the first people to be really gender critical on the stuff, and he was saying how he's really been surprised over the years about how many women have attacked women and the way they do it so vicious. And he was really, really surprised at that.
Yeah.
Is that sounds like a similar experience for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the people who've come for me the most at university have been overwhelmingly been women. And I think some of it is because and I don't, I'm sort of undecided on how much I now believe in social sort of being socialized to behave in a certain way. I do think this is an element of it that girls are taught to be kind and to
Mm,
be empathetic and to be agreeable. And therefore, if someone says something that most people disagree with, actually by siding with the majority that seem to disagree with it, you are still being agreeable by agreeing with the people who disagree with the one
yeah.
person. Um, but recently, I mean, a good example of it was that my friend Maeve and I set a display up on Leeds campus just around a picnic bench with some signs in support of women's rights and the Supreme Court ruling. And it attracted a lot of attention, but the people who were most upset about it were women.
Oh
One
wow.
of them being a female member of staff who was debating with us, but it wasn't so much of a debate because she was calling us transphobic. She at one point called over to the rest of the crowd and said, "Come and tell these people why transphobia is
She
bad."
was at staff.
Staff member, and when
Wow.
our signs were cut down and stolen by two male students, and when it happened, she clapped and said, "Yeah, tear it down. This is a member of
Bloody
staff at
hell.
the university." Um, but yeah, another girl came up and sort of instead of having debate, she sort of just shouted. There was someone else who had been debating very respectfully with us, albeit disagreeing very strongly. And instead of her coming over to debate with us herself, she went up to this guy and said, "I commend you for standing up to these people," and then turned to us and started to basically not shouting, but raising her voice and she was very angry. And I said,
Right.
"Why don't you debate with us?" And she's like, "No, why would I debate with you? You know, you're spreading misinformation." Yeah, so the anger felt very much directed from female students rather than male students. We actually had a
Crazy.
lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but a sizable amount of male students come up to us quite closely, as in whisper to us, "I agree with you, like, this is great."
Oh wow.
One guy walked past, he just sort of walked past quickly so he didn't stay standing in the crowd saying, common sense prevails and things like that.
Oh, amazing.
Um, but yeah, it definitely is mainly female students who have a massive issue with it.
Did you do like I think it's Charlie Kirk who does it at universities where he sits there and people have a mic? Was that the sort of similar?
It was kind of like that, but on a very amateur scale. We didn't
Okay.
have a
Okay.
mic or anything. We were
Okay.
just sat on a picnic bench. We didn't even have a sign saying "Come and speak to us." But so above our heads, we had the flag that says, at the Kelly J. Keane flag that says "Women are adult human females," and then we also had bits of cardboard that had A4 bits of paper on that just had black and white text, and there was quite a lot of text, so if someone wanted to read what it said they had to come quite close, and it
Got
was
it.
up to them. Like, we weren't saying "Come and speak to us."
Right.
We didn't have a sign saying "Come and speak to us," so people would come up to us by their own will, and at that point we might start having a discussion. Some people came and read the signs and then walked off. Some
Right.
people stood there and just listened to the other conversations that were going on. So it kind of was Charlie Kirk style, but it wasn't really, because we were inviting, I guess he does this as well, inviting people to debate with us,
Okay.
but we weren't
Okay.
being as explicit about it. It wasn't an organised thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the staff member thing is crazy because
Mm.
that's definitely something I really want to talk to you about today. Is the role of universities when it comes to the gender ideology stuff? Because um, it's been a few years for me, but not that long ago when I went to university, and it definitely wasn't a topic that was ever discussed. I don't think it was ever raised. But it seems like now, no matter what your course or degree is, it's brought up. Um, what role do you think universities have played when it comes to the gender ideology? Actually, before that, for people who haven't watched our first podcast, or people who are unaware of your story, it'd be good to just get a brief overview of how you
Mm.
got involved in all of this.
So last summer in 2024, I realised I'd done a lot of research and realised what side of the debate I came down on this, because I used to sort of blindly accept trans women are women because I very much bought into woke ideology, and so by consequence it was natural that I would sort of accept the idea that someone's gender identity was who they were, and we should accept, respect, and endorse their own claim. And then over summer last year, I came to I'd been questioning it for a long time. It was by the end of sixth form I first started questioning it, and then this time last year I'd properly thought, right, I want to really look into this, and I decided that I wanted to do my dissertation on gender identity. And by the time I came back for my final year in September in 2024, I decided I wanted to start my own podcast about it. But simultaneously, I was also taking up my position on committee at Leeds Student Radio, and I
Okay.
was overseeing the talk shows. And I was doing my own podcast separately from LSR. It wasn't on their platforms. It was just a personal project. And I, in doing my podcast, I interviewed Graham Linehan, and I also wrote an article for his Substack, in which I described what the climate was like on campus to do with gender ideology, the fact that it is just everywhere and that you don't have a choice as to whether you are conforming to it. So, and one of the examples I used, amongst many, was the fact that on the wall in the Leeds Student Radio office where they displayed the committee members, on my post that had my face and name, had my pronouns next to my name, and I hadn't been asked if I wanted my pronouns next to my name. I hadn't actually been
Right.
asked what my pronouns were, which
Right. Right.
kind of defeated the whole point. But anyway, the day after that article was released, I was told that I'd been suspended from my committee position and from my membership of Leeds Student Radio. And I was told, on one hand, I was told it was a confidential matter, but I was also told that I needed to remove myself from LSR platforms, including group chats, which was kind of like, well, if I
Crazy.
just leave group chats and without saying why I'm leaving as a
Yeah.
committee member. So it was a tricky time because I didn't know who I could speak to. But anyway, the investigation went on longer than they, according to their own policy, should have gone on for. So I was left hanging, basically. And eventually they decided that they found me guilty of bringing LSR into disrepute, but they didn't tell me how I'd done that. But when I was permanently removed from my position, and also they said that I was guilty of bringing LSR into disrepute, but if I did want to run for committee again, I could only do so if I provided a written apology to the wider membership.
Oh wow.
Even though they weren't telling me what I'd done that
Yeah.
was wrong. So even if I did want to write an apology, I don't know what I'd be apologising for because they hadn't told me what I'd done wrong.
Okay.
It was, the whole thing was very vague, and I kept asking them to clarify what the charge is here, and they couldn't. And at the interview as part of the investigation, they said, this investigation is not about your right to have or say these views, but how do you maintain an inclusive environment within LSR, considering your choice to publicly post your views makes some people feel unincluded. So it was very clear that it was about my views, however much they say that it wasn't. And the FSU helped me throughout this whole process. And when I was suspended, they gave the story to a journalist, and that's how I started talking about free speech and women's rights within universities.
Amazing. And when that was happening, they obviously didn't give you clear clarity. Have they given you any clarity since?
Well, we appealed, as in myself, with the help of the FSU, so the Free Speech Union, appealed their decision, and we got the decision of the appeal after Christmas. And they overturned aspects. They admitted that lots of the procedure was unfair.
Right.
about the fact that I wasn't given enough detail, the fact that certain people involved with the investigation were not neutral, um, and lots of other things about the way that it was communicated to me. But overall, they didn't overturn my suspension because they upheld their decision that I had brought LSR into disrepute. But this time they did give me evidence, or their evidence, of why I'd brought LSR into disrepute. And one of them, well, the first one is they argued that I had publicly criticised LSR by including that bit in my article about my pronouns
Right.
being next to my name, which is kind of seems a bit authoritarian. So you're not
Yeah, yeah,
allowed to
yeah.
publicly criticize a society that you're in. That's strange.
Yeah.
But also they said the other way that I'd brought LSR into disrepute and their evidence was that the LGBT society had told LSR that they didn't want to work with the station because of me. I mean, that is clearly about my
Yeah,
views.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So, yeah, it wasn't overturned, but it's blindingly obvious that they have an issue with people saying that women are adult human females.
Did this affect your course? Like what was going on in your
No,
course?
this situation didn't affect what was happening on my course. No.
Okay. It's just so what I'm trying to get at is like your lecturers, your people around, staff members at university. Did you receive much support or anything,
I
or the opposite?
received private support from about 3 lecturers. They were just emails over Christmas checking in whether I was okay. I very much got the impression that it wasn't just, and I was told by one of them that it's not just a pastoral thing to check in that you're okay. They said, we agree, or I agree with you.
That's actually not bad.
No,
I wouldn't
it
have
was
thought
really
3.
nice. It was really
That's not.
nice considering how I know that the philosophy department is really captured. But as much as I appreciate their private support, it would have been great to have some public support.
Yeah, yeah.
Because no one in authority at the university came out to publicly support me, but their members of staff are very happy to make it very clear that they don't support me, including the union leadership. So after Maeve and I held the display, the union put a statement out, the student union put a statement out saying that they hadn't authorised it, which is strange because I didn't realise that. I just don't think it should be a thing that you have to ask for permission to sit on a bench with some sign trying
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
incite on a university campus. The idea you'd have to ask for permission to open
Especially
up
when
a
you're a
discussion.
student of that
Yeah,
university.
and I had exhausted other options. I'd tried to have my own podcast about
Yeah.
it at the student radio. I'd even gone to the debating society and asked if they would host a debate between James S's and someone else, and they
Right.
said no because that went against their values. So there really isn't much space to do that at university. So it was almost like a last ditch attempt. And also because I feel like some students think that I think I'm above criticism when
Yeah.
actually all I want is to debate with people about this topic because I do want to convince people that this is the correct side.
Yeah.
Because I think it does the least harm and is actually the more liberal position. But yeah, so it was a kind of a last-ditch attempt, but the fact that the student union put out that statement saying that it wasn't authorised, and also if anyone felt affected by it, they could basically write to the university, write to the student union.
That's like almost asking for people to like criticize you further. But what I found really when I spoke to you, when I read your story, so like worrying and scary was that it's Leeds and not London. I always presumed that a lot of the problems and a lot of people who are on that side of the fence and who are quite aggressive about it, I always presumed it's London. That's a London thing. Maybe Birmingham, like big urban cities. I did not think Leeds would be part of that conversation. I know it's students and people from different places coming to Leeds, but I just didn't see that happening. Were you surprised?
No, because as soon as I got to university, it was very clear the sort of ideological direction that the student union went in. I mean, like I said, at the end of sixth form, when I first started questioning things, literally just as I was about to take my exams, and then 4 months later, I was at university. And because I had started questioning it, I was noticing things far more. And whether that was pride progress flags everywhere, pronouns everywhere, and then the gender
This is
expression
at university. But you did a philosophy course, right? So outside of, you could argue philosophy course is going to be a bit more, you're going to get much more conversations about this sort of stuff. But just around the university in general, did you see a lot of this stuff, like the pride flags, gender stuff, elsewhere?
Outside university.
So outside the philosophy area, if you like,
Oh,
outside
this
philosophy.
so what I'm describing is sort of the student union in the campus
Oh
as a
wow,
whole.
okay,
So
okay.
this isn't
Oh,
really
okay.
within. It's the student union that is definitely the worst. I mean, I've had issues on
Right,
my course which I can't talk about for now, but the student unions in general at every university are the ones that are the most tyrannical when it comes to this,
right.
because they're ran by students who are elected by other students. So the ones you're most likely, you're just not going to, you're very unlikely to win on any sort of conservative or anti-woke ticket.
Right, right, right,
Um, yeah, I just think that most people who have those views probably think it's a waste of time getting involved in student politics.
right.
So that's why the student unions are an issue, because yeah, they're run by students who are, at the moment at least, all very ideologically captured.
I went to see it again. It's not that long ago. My student unions and the ones, even friends that I had visited around UK, the student unions were basically just organizing like night outs. Like that was the big thing, like to make more social events. There was nothing about politics remotely or
Mm.
gender or anything like that. It was literally just to organize nights out with different groups of people. That was literally it. That's all I remember.
Student unions still do that, but I think and this is, I think Andrew Gold said this before, like they don't see, they're so sure of their position that they don't see it as a political one. So they would say, well, this isn't
Right, right,
political.
right,
This is about human rights, and human rights shouldn't be political.
right.
So that's probably the stance they take on gender. But an example I could give you off the top of my head was when Tommy Robinson held his rally in London last October. The student union organised a bus for students who wanted to go to the counter protest, but they didn't organise a
Right,
bus for
right.
students who might want to go to Tommy's march.
Interesting.
So yeah, but I don't think it would even occur to them to be like, well, why would we organise a bus to go to a Tommy Robinson march? Of course,
Mm.
everyone's going to want to be on the other side. Um,
I
but
think it's
yeah,
bizarre just to even organize a bus in the first place for the counter, like just for any, like
yeah,
just
for any
stay
protest at
out of
all,
it.
you either
Yeah,
have to organise it for both or none at
yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah. That'd make
Yeah,
far more sense. So, like, Leeds is essentially now done, right, for you? Like your Leeds University's that chapter's closed.
yeah.
Um, uh, I'm guessing there's stuff going on. You kind of hinted towards that. You can't talk about yet.
Mm.
Um, once that's what's happening there, the things you can share on that, obviously not.
The things that I can't share today, I can't share because I've been told that if I do share them, then I could risk being expelled, and I haven't actually received my degree yet.
Right, 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 right. Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's just crazy hearing about your experience and what's going on in university campuses. So you did the one with the bench. That was a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
correct? You had a member of staff from the university criticizing you and trying to get other people to go against you. You mentioned that there's been 3 staff members supportive of you. Uh, what's been the response outside of university from people?
Oh, amazing, amazing. I remember when the story first came out, it was really overwhelming because I had a small, but for someone like me as a younger person who just sort of started tweeting, I had gained, a couple thousand followers. And then when the story came out, it was really overwhelming. Um, but then I've faced a lot of criticisms. Oh, you've got no friends, so you've had to rely on old women to support you.
Right. Okay.
You've only got old women for friends. Firstly, what's wrong with having older women as friends? I love, I love the friends I have that happen to be older women. And it just is a part of this movement that the majority of gender critical feminists or TERFs do happen to be older, and that's because of how much younger generations have been captured and haven't been taught anything different.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's a general lack of critical thinking at universities now because you're not presented with both sides. You're not presented with both sides. Like on one of my feminist philosophy module, 40% of it was about gender identity, but there wasn't one paper on the reading list that was presenting the complete opposite side.
Right.
And we were almost arguing within gender identity theory which theory of gender identity is the best, rather than is gender identity theory at all valid.
Yeah.
You're literally just not presented with the other side. And I don't know how common that is on other courses or in other modules, but I obviously noticed it a lot because I was very much aware of
Yeah.
the other side because I was on it, and knowing that students weren't being given that. So when I was in seminars, I was arguing from a place that almost seemed not credible because we weren't giving given any reading on that side. I
Okay.
didn't even have like an academic article to say, look, but everyone's read this, and I agree with
Right.
that. Um, yeah.
They don't even give you that option, it seems. But
Mm.
going back to the point of older women, I think one of the reasons that they're so passionate about this, rightly so, is because they will understand the fight that women had to do in the first place
Yeah.
to get these rights. They will have witnessed it throughout their lifetimes. They will have actually gone through serious misogyny, sexism, actually struggled to get a job. And so I think for them, it's like infuriating because they fought for this pretty much their whole life. I think it's very different now with maybe younger women who necessarily haven't had to fight as much, so they
Mm.
don't necessarily understand that you're actually what people have done in their last 30, 40 years. These women have done is incredible for
Mhm.
what they've done and how far it's gone. Obviously, there's still misogyny, sexism, whatever, but I think the way that the general culture has completely shifted, I think a lot of them will remember times when not like
Yeah.
that. And I think that's probably why they're really passionate. And maybe younger people don't necessarily understand or can feel what
Yeah.
those older people have done.
Absolutely. I think I've always considered myself a feminist when I was at school when I was younger. And I've studied feminist history in A-level politics. We learnt about feminism. So I've always sort of had a very basic understanding of what happened in the first and second wave of feminism, and it then rapidly changing into something, becoming feminism as a thing becoming very inflated towards after the second wave, like third wave feminism, intersectional feminism. Suddenly feminism is for everyone, as Bell Hooks said.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
if it's for everyone, then it's not for no one.
yeah,
Feminism is about women, and if it's for everyone, then it can't be about women. um but it's like you say, I feel like, without wanting to sound patronizing, but I don't think I can get away without sounding patronizing, is that, and from my experiences in these seminars talking to these girls, one of the first seminars we had was about oppression that women have faced. And we were sort of talking about oppression that women face today. And I just found it very sort of, I mean, I've sort of been brought up to be very grateful for what I have.
yeah,
And I've always been very aware of what are the chances that I was born in this country,
yeah,
in the UK, where, it doesn't get much better than this in
yeah.
terms of, luck of the draw as to where you happen to be born in terms of your freedom and your rights. And I just asked the other girls in the seminar, do you actually feel oppressed? Like,
Yeah.
that's a very strong
Yeah.
word. Like, it doesn't really get much work. Because I was thinking, so if we're oppressed, then what are women in Afghanistan? Is there another word to describe what's happening to them? And some of the girls said, yeah, I think I am oppressed. And they were naming the sorts of things that made them oppressed. And they were thinking like being treated differently in the workplace, or being catcalled and things like that, which of course are all wrong.
Yeah.
But to say that that is oppression, if that is happening, that's against the law. We have laws to protect being
Yeah.
discriminated in the workplace. And I just thought that the word oppressed was far too strong to be using for women in this country. Of course, sexism still exists and misogyny still exists. But to say that we're oppressed when you're having an excellent education, well, arguably, supposedly an excellent education at a university,
Yeah.
where you can walk around and supposedly say what you want and wear what you want, that is not oppression to me. And I think that they have a lack of appreciation. Some girls have a lack of appreciation for that, and therefore they don't see trans ideology as a threat to their rights, because I think that they sort of feel like their rights have been won, so nothing could possibly turn them back, and
Right.
they just I think part of it is because they don't want to speak about it, because I think there's a fear of, if you do read the other side of the argument, you might realize you're wrong. Like when
Mm.
I first realized, oh my god, I think I'm a TERF, I felt really guilty because I knew that I'd pushed the other side of the argument
Yeah.
before, and I felt embarrassed about how blindly I just followed it. And I think there might be some of that, but also when you see what happens to people when they disagree, who wants to go through that? And I've actually had people at university who used to support me and then sort of understand my right to say what I wanted to say. And then the more I kept going on about it, and the more that it riled other people up, they sort of they don't want to associate with me anymore.
I honestly, I can relate to that like so much. I mean, not so much on the gender critical stuff, but just in other
Mm.
aspects where I'm talking about immigration or whatever. I can definitely relate to that because I think for a lot of people, when they have a perception of who you are and then that you decide to change that,
Mm.
then they just can't comprehend,
Yeah.
to adapt, and think to yourself, oh, like you could call it growth, or you could call it changing, whatever. They just, because they already have, like, Connie is this person, and the moment you go outside of that lane of who Connie is, and you can do it a little bit, but then when you go too far, then it's like, I
Mm,
don't want to know you because you're
mm,
just not the person I put in that box. But I think it's interesting with the feminist stuff, because if I'm honest, when I was younger, I would not describe myself. I'd almost say I'm an anti-feminist. When
mm,
I was younger, I thought that all feminism was just about gender pay gap, and that's literally what I thought when I was younger. Um, as I've got older, I think I'd maybe be like I think Judy Bindel, somebody said it to me. I'm like an old school feminist. Like
mm.
I'd probably be one like in the 70s, like who just believed in like the liberation of women
Yeah.
and having them had the choice to do what they want. So whether it's being somebody who's really career ambitious, or somebody who values having kids or whatever, like you should have the choice. And I think that's, if you said that to a modern feminist, especially the kids thing, then I think they would probably be like, that's not feminism, or so I don't know where I kind of stand on feminism anymore, because I feel like the modern day feminism is not proper feminism. I don't know.
No,
It just
and
doesn't.
I think it's almost taking the easy way out and actually bending the knee to, well, they're giving their own rights away a lot of the time. I don't necessarily like, I find the word feminism, or calling myself a feminist, quite uncomfortable sometimes, because the word doesn't mean what it used to mean. I would sort of, on my bios on social media, I'd say women's rights, rather than call, women's rights campaigner rather than a feminist. Um, Yeah, and it's just, yeah, the word feminist, a lot of it, because it has been so expanded, the idea that it's for everyone, and that we also have the responsibility as feminists to be looking after everyone, because everyone is affected by the patriarchy. And I think a lot of the time it's almost the easy way out to say, oh, we're going to deal with those sort of snide remarks that men make sometimes. It's like, yes, yeah, it's not nice when someone says that, but I think the more that young women talk about themselves as being oppressed, they convince themselves that they
Yeah.
are. And therefore, when those things happen, they don't feel confident enough to sort of counteract it. So, for example, when the Me Too movement happened, yes, very important things were spoken about, but we haven't really been safer.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
We're in a very safe space compared to what women used to be. Where, for example, a husband could rape his wife in a marriage. Obviously, at the time, it wasn't called rape, but you could have unconsent. It was lawful to have unconsensual sex within marriage up until
Yeah.
the 1990s. But the more that women, or young women in particular, sort of embrace this idea that they are oppressed when it comes to having difficult situations where a man, for example, or a woman might speak to you in a way that you think, are you speaking to me like that because I mean, I never like to make that assumption, because some people
Mm.
say to me, he wouldn't speak to you like that if you weren't a woman. And I think, well, I can still deal with it. And I think we need to teach women, you just have to be assertive.
Yeah.
And in some ways that is quite unfeminine. And
Yeah.
in lots of ways, I think I have masculine tendencies in that way, because I'm very happy to voice my opinion and debate with people and back myself to do that. Whereas if you're told that women are constantly facing all of this oppression through language, basically, then it's like, oh, well, the only way to stop that is by silencing people, rather than just being more confident in yourself and say, actually, no, I don't accept that. It doesn't mean sort of removing those people's voices, but
Yeah.
within the workplace or at university, just be more confident. And I know that's a lot easier said than done, but it doesn't help if you're constantly believing this idea that women in this country in particular are oppressed and don't have any real power.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, like, well, what you're saying, and I heard Miriam Grossman say it, and it's like you need to allow for different, like, profiles of females. Like, some are going to be more assertive, some are going to be less assertive, some are going to be more open, some are going to be more closed, some want to have children, some don't. And what feminism should be about is allowing women to make those choices, and they shouldn't be pigeonholed or like shouted about if they decide to go either way, which
Mm.
it just seems now like you have to be a certain profile of women, and often it's women who will then attack if you don't meet that profile, rather than you have to be a certain type of woman now. And I think, yeah, I'm not sure what the next stages are for like feminism and stuff, because I think I would argue the biggest problem women have is the trans stuff, this gender
Mm.
ideology, for sure. For me, that's the biggest issue of like our generation. I think that is going to carry on. I don't think the Supreme Court rulings like done and dusted. I think that's like the biggest challenge for women's rights, and I think it's setting them back like decades, if not
Yeah.
more. And I think there's other problem. Like both genders have their own sort of separate problems. And I think another problem for women at the moment is there's a whole. I was reading recently about how um, women now from the age of 20 to 30 are getting paid substantially more than men. And that doesn't sound like a massive problem. Who cares who gets paid more? But I think there's a problem in terms of like dating pool for women as well, in terms of there's not actually that many eligible men because men are not
Mm.
becoming men, they're staying as boys.
Mm.
And so I think there's a problem there, if you like. And I just think a lot of the modern day feminism is like replacing the hierarchy. So for a long
Yeah.
time, men have been at the hierarchy, whatever. Now it's women, rather than just saying women have definitely some problems right now, and just like men do too. And there's probably a way we can tackle them differently. They're not the same.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
I think it's
I
hard.
think some people, when I say what I'm about to say, will think that I'm being quite anti-feminist, but I do find it very interesting, the sort of girl boss phenomenon. On one hand, like I was saying, girls think that they are oppressed in the workplace and they're spoken to differently, but also women are doing better than ever when it comes to high
Yeah,
performing jobs. Um, but why is it that women? It's like, and you can draw parallels with the trans ideology as well. Women almost feel like in order to become equal to men, they need to do what men have always done. Like,
mm,
why do you want to be giving your career,
mm,
choosing a very sort of high intensity career? And I completely respect any woman who wants to do that. I know that's what I want to do,
yeah,
but it's this sort of culture of like women should go out and and have their career and they can have children if they want to, rather than still respecting on equal merit women who want to stay at home, for example, and have kids.
yeah,
And I think that's, well, at least my experience, some young women that I've spoken to, including friends, seem to sort of look down on the idea of having children staying at home to have your children and
yeah,
stop working if you're in a situation where your other half is earning enough to support everyone. Um, it's strange how it very much seems that this sort of girl boss thing is being valued a lot higher than women who might choose to stay at home. And I know I've spoken to women who say, actually, I do really like the idea of getting married and having children and staying at home, but they kind of say it, they sort of tone their
yeah, yeah,
voice
yeah,
down because they almost feel embarrassed, because it's like they've been taught that in order to be proud of being a woman, you have to do what traditionally men have always done, which is go to work. And I'm not saying that that is something that women shouldn't do, but it's this sort of idea that it's less powerful, and you're not reclaiming your womanhood if you don't go off to work and work in a job that traditionally only men had done. I haven't put that very well, but I just think
No,
that,
I get it,
yeah.
because I think like that's like I'd argue it's almost anti-feminist. You should empower the women that want to go out and
Mm,
be female bosses, and you should also empower the ones that want to have children. There's
yeah,
no
yeah.
right or wrong way to live life, but I think it's almost an illiberal way of thinking where they all have to be a certain type, and I think that's just not.
Mm.
I don't think that's good for society or women. What are some of the challenges for you in terms of post university now? So you're obviously on the job hunt, in that space now. What are some of the challenges that you think you'll be facing going forward? Obviously, naturally, university, especially the last year, seems like it's been pretty challenging. Do you think that will affect your future career?
Luckily for me, no. If anything, it's done wonders for my career, and I was aware of that at the very beginning. And I was in a very lucky situation that I already wanted to go into journalism, and as much as it was quite a very turbulent and stressful time, and very lonely actually. And university was very lonely this year, because of what had happened. But yeah, I was very lucky that I wanted to go into journalism anyway, hence my involvement with student radio. And I just thought, right, if you want to suspend me, then watch me turn this into a good thing.
Mm.
Um, and I do wonder whether they regret
They've
suspending
created
me
this
from, because they
monster. They've
have that, and
created
I use
this.
that phrase. They have created a monster, and I see it happen to my other friends who I've met through turfing, other friends at university who are, I'd have friends at the moment who are going through cancellations, and they're only getting more wound up, and they can't wait to be more open and bold about it, because a bit like Glinner, as soon as you're told that you can't say something, that makes you want to say it more.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of that natural, like, childlike reaction. If
Yeah.
you're told no, you're going to want to do it more. So in that sense, it's been really great for my career, because it means that I have stood out in a way, because, and I remember a student said to me at the time, before I started talking about gender, but I did my first podcast episode, I went to the Reform UK conference on a media pass as a student radio station.
Right.
And I did my first episode on that, and a student said, "Oh, that's quite cool. Like, no one else is talking about this." And then I also had other students suggesting that I shouldn't be platforming Reform UK because they're this far-right fascist party. Even though no one knows really my views on Reform UK at all. So there was no basis to the idea that I was trying to promote them. It was covering them, and actually I was quite critical in the podcast episode. But yeah, it's shut a lot of doors. Like, I doubt I'll be getting a job at the BBC anytime soon. But other doors have, obviously, lots of other doors have opened, and I've met amazing people. But I'm very aware of the fact that I'm very lucky to be in this position. And what happened to me is nowhere near as bad as what's happened to other people that I know of who have been cancelled at their university, who just want to have a career that doesn't involve speaking publicly. For example,
Yeah.
if you just want to be a lawyer, or you want to go into healthcare, they just want to get on with having their opinions and being able to discuss them, but they don't want to go public with it.
Yeah.
And, so I hope to use the opportunities I've had to talk about those other experiences that other people have had, because they wouldn't want to sort of go public with it, but I sort of saw the opportunity and went with it. So in terms of my career, it's only done good things, and it means that I can now have a career doing something that I'm passionate about, which I'd say not many people necessarily have that privilege.
Majority of people won't.
Yeah.
Majority of people won't. And I think that's so amazing. Do you think this will be your future path now, sort of defending, well, I'd argue right now, fighting for, but like in the future, if this gets overturned and changes, but do you think that will be that's essentially going to be your future, which is to defend and fight for women's rights? Do you think that will be your...
I think at the moment, I very much see my path at the moment about just defending free speech more generally. Women's rights, obviously women's rights also I want to continue defending, but more primarily the right to say that you support that position, and also for the rights of other people to say they support the other side. Because I think some people think that I want to silence trans activists, but no, I'm actually more than happy and love it when they speak, because I think they do our job for us a lot of the time. So yeah, I would say at the moment I'm more passionate about, in general, defending free speech. Obviously, I'd never stop defending women's rights, but I feel like in terms of young people, and that's what I really wanted to do, was encourage more young women in particular, but young men as well, to feel more able to express these views and have sort of a community. I don't like that word really, but have a community to discuss these things with. We have now established that, and so there is a wave of young people that are all sort of behind the scenes, and many of them don't want to speak publicly, but they're behind the scenes helping and supporting. And I feel like, yeah, there's enough young people that's not going to stop, even if people like me and Maeve, who, and I'm not saying that we are the only younger people, but in terms of university students at the moment, we have been quite vocal about it. But there are so many other people behind the scenes that even if we went on to do other things, there are many people who I think will speak up and are doing so.
Have you had people reach out from other universities?
Yeah, loads. Yeah. So
Oh, wow.
I've got a network now of many students from all across the country, in Scotland, in Wales, and in UK and in Ireland as well.
Right.
People I've got someone from Australia, from the US and Canada. So, and they're the sorts of people. Yeah. So we've had a lot of contact from people everywhere.
Amazing. What were some of the experiences from people abroad? You mentioned Australia. What are some of their experiences?
I'm not really sure. I wouldn't necessarily be able to comment because I'm not too sure, to be honest, about people, because we have contact from a lot of people. I haven't necessarily spoken to everyone individually. But obviously in Australia, things are very different, almost the opposite of what it's like in the UK now in terms of the law. I have actually no idea what it's like on campuses and at schools and universities, so I won't be able to comment much, but I know that, at least from the people I've spoken to, they don't have people that they can necessarily speak to, hence why they've reached out to someone on the other side of the world that they don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fascinating. I think the first time I heard about your story was maybe GB News, and I think I was surprised to see. I obviously knew how captured universities were, but I didn't realize to the extent that they would deplatform you from a student radio station. Um, I'm guessing now that that's almost behind you ish. Do you, I don't know, do you see at any time in the future them apologizing or any sort, have they offered any sort of olive branch in the last few months? Because they will have seen your profiles
Mm,
grown, they will have seen that you're not one, or you're not in, one of few people, you're one of many. They would have seen a
yeah.
lot of changes in your life and people, the clear support that you've got. Have you seen any changes from the university, and do you think that will change in the coming weeks, months?
No. If anything, I think they will be very glad to see me go.
Okay.
I'm quite nervous for graduation, actually, because obviously that will be the last time where I'm sort of on campus. So don't know what would happen necessarily, but um, yeah, I think they'll be very glad to see me go. I mean, when Maeve and I held the display on campus, there were multiple members of staff at the student union who were coming out to help the counter protest. So, for example, the staff member who cheered and clapped when our signs were stolen, she went and printed off a load of trans flags and put them in front of us to replace our signs.
Bloody hell.
And obviously, we just kept sitting there talking to people. It didn't stop our discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, members of staff coming out and holding Pride Progress flags. There was also another member of staff, member of the estates team actually, who came very early on when we'd only been sat there for not too long. She came to speak to us and originally was asking a question, and I was, she was asking, so where do trans men, as in women who identify as men, come into this? And I was trying to explain my point of view, but before I finished, she pointed at me and she was like, "Are you Connie Shaw?" And I went, "Yeah." And she went, "Right, that's enough then. This is a member of staff." And she walked off and I said, "Why is that enough?" And she said, because she said something like, I know what you talk about, and I think you talk absolute fucking bollocks, babe.
Bloody
And
hell.
this is a member of staff, like,
Bloody.
So
So there was more
yeah.
than one member of staff.
Yeah.
That is
So
crazy.
so there was an estates team, someone who actually works at the university not the student union, the university, and yes, members of the student union, so the elected officials, and individual. I could see. So I got a lot of I wouldn't call them hate comments because I think that's too extreme, but a lot of disapproving comments on my Instagram afterwards when we posted about it.
Right.
And you can see on Instagram who likes the comments, and it's
Yeah.
like members of the student executive liking the comments, saying that you don't represent all students. Some comments said leave, as in get off campus. I saw one student post on their story, report Connie Shaw's presence on campus. Yeah, it was I don't know what they think they're going to achieve with that, because all of these people who are liking the comments and commenting, we didn't speak to that many people individually. Like, they're too scared to come and have the conversation. Some of them, at least, I know. I guess they might say, well, I couldn't come, but it's like we were there for 6 hours.
They cared enough they would come.
No, exactly, but they care
cared
enough to comment, but it's so
Yeah.
performative. But yeah, I can see, it's people who work within the union making it very clear that they think that we shouldn't have the right to say what we say. And lots of students came out and got chalk and drew all on the floor, sort of trans rights are human rights. One about trans lesbians, i.e. men who say that they're lesbians because they identify as women, which is obviously a really homophobic thing, because lesbians are female people who are only attracted to other women, female people. They don't want to sleep with male people, and if you do, by definition, you're not a lesbian, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was quite concerned. There was one point as well where, again, having a respectful conversation, but this sort of attempt to, I think, at least subconscious attempt to try and sort of make us stop, trying to silence us a bit. And it's a pattern that is very observable when you speak to men who identify as women. We had one male student who was arguing the other side, and he said that he was trans, I assume identified as a woman, because he, sort of towards the end of our discussion, he looked at Maeve and I and he said, "I like being a girl with a dick." And like, hearing that is really uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean I don't think he should be able to say it, but it does feel uncomfortable. I'm very much aware
Definitely.
of you should be exposed to views that make you feel uncomfortable, but knowing that he was arguing that he should be able to access female only spaces and then ending his thing of like, I like being a girl with a dick. Oh, it was just,
It's almost
I
like,
don't know. It's
yeah,
just like, God, can no one else see what's going,
it's like
like,
predatorial.
yeah, no,
It's,
but
yeah,
it
it's
does feel
nuts.
predatorial. A bit similar when we counter protest the topless trans protest outside Downing Street the other week. There was Wesley Winter was covering it, and he interviewed someone who was at the trans protest, and it was, I remember seeing that he was wearing a helmet. He was dressed in fetish gear, and on the helmet it said she her, so I'm assuming he identified as a woman. It was a man. And Wesley said, you know, what do you think of the counter protest? And he looked at us and he kind of sneered at us. And he's like, wouldn't mind going to bed with some of them. And it's
Bloody
like obviously
hell.
four young women and a guy stood there. Um, yeah, so it's just, I think they like to say things to sort of shock you into being like, oh my God, and you think, and then you try and explain when they say, oh, I've never had an issue going into women's spaces and you're a man who identifies as a woman. It's like, well, when you say things like that, why would a woman feel confident in a supposedly enclosed area that's meant to be for her own safety to then challenge someone, or to challenge someone who they know might have a penis or might think those things
Mm.
about, I like being a girl with a dick. Like, yeah, it was quite it was just, sorry to sort of bring it back to the question about sort of the union and the staff. It is upsetting, not that that means that something being upsetting isn't a good argument, but it is upsetting to think, and just frankly mind-boggling, that the union would side with people like that rather than
Then
young women who
yeah.
want their rights to single-sex spaces. And the university itself, so lots of universities put out statements after the Supreme Court ruling to address it. Many of them just said blatantly that we're not going to change our policies, and they said that they're going to continue breaking the law.
Wow.
So the University of Leeds put their statement out, and the current policy at Leeds is that you can choose which facilities you go into based on your gender identity. So that means it's a free for all, basically. There is no such thing as a single sex space at University of Leeds. And their statement about the Supreme Court ruling said, we will only change our policy if there's a legal obligation to do so, even though the highest court in the land has just told them what the law is. And like, what can you do at that point? You know?
It just seems like they're not going to change unless they're going to basically get sued or
Yes.
something. I think that's basically what they're saying.
Yeah.
But that's so scary. I think the most recent podcast I did was with Graham Linan, and we talked about the predatorial elements of the I'm not saying every trans activist is. I'm sure the majority aren't, but there is definitely a predatorial side to it, which I am really surprised at how many people can't see. And if you are a genuine trans activist, then why would you want these people in your group?
I
Surely you
know.
distance yourself from them and
I know.
say, you know, you're actually making my argument a lot worse. I've often, sometimes on the political spectrum, come on the right, and if I can see a genuine neo-Nazi, like not what everyone, not the modern version of it, then I would distance myself from that person, not inflate them or like get them
Yeah.
going. And I just don't understand why they don't see it when it's so obvious. And then the second part is, why not just distance yourself away from it? Because it's just destroying your argument. I think their argument's so flawed as it is, but then you're adding another element to it. And I think it's really, really shameful that they're not doing that.
Yeah. I think the reason why people don't is either they are just so oblivious, or they know that, well, it's just the nature of the ideology that if you start saying, well, actually this person isn't, so why aren't they? And then they have to kind of backtrack and say, well, this person might not really be a real trans person, because they talk about, oh, well,
Yeah.
that's not a real trans person. Clearly,
Right.
they do just want to get into women's spaces. It's like, so how do we tell the difference between a real trans person or a fake trans person? Because they like to say, you know, the real threat is cis men. And there's nothing stopping cis men from going into women's toilets. Do you really believe that a man would pretend to be a trans woman to go into a women's toilets? It's like, you're so close. You're so close to getting it. I think that any man who says that he's a woman and goes into a women's only space is doing that.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether they are predatory or not. You wouldn't be going into that space if you didn't identify as trans.
Yeah.
Or you wouldn't think that you have the right to do that. But Sarah Jane Baker, or Alan Baker, who was the person leading that protest outside Downing Street, he's served a total of 30 years in prison, and one of his convictions is for kidnapping and torturing a child. And he was
Crazy.
leading the protest, and you have hundreds of people following him, and he's the one on the mic with his fake boobs out, calling us fascists. And when I spoke to Wesley on the mic, and I just said, I just can't. These people who are following, do they even know who this guy is?
Yeah.
He's a dangerous
Yeah,
person,
yeah, yeah.
and he I think he managed to avoid facing punishment for saying, if you see a TERF, punch them in the fucking throat. Like, he's a violent
Yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah.
Not saying that he hasn't had, there aren't reasons, or I think he's had a very troubled life, but still, that's neither here nor there. This is a person who is the last person that last man. Don't want any men. We don't want any men in our spaces, let alone we keep all men out, so we know that men like that are definitely not coming in.
Yeah.
But the sort of logic doesn't work, and that's why the distancing yourself from that is like, well, if you know that this man who says he's a woman is dangerous, what about all the other ones? Do you have to wait until they do something?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's not
yeah.
how safeguarding works or safe spaces work. So I'm not surprised that people don't distance themselves, because once you spot one issue, it's like, what else is going on here? And that's when the whole thing starts crumbling down. So you either have to be fully in or not. And you witness it at the moment. There's a trans person on X who is quite a large commentator on issues, and this person is starting to question what they think about things, and they previously have been quite a rabid TRA.
Right.
And their audience and followers are absolutely turning against them, even though this person identifies as trans, and they're just saying they're reflecting on a few things about the movement that they don't fully buy into anymore. And this person has had, and they've posted about it, this person has had people email his workplace or their workplace saying that they shouldn't be able to work there anymore, even though she, it's a female person, has been fighting for LGBT rights her whole life. So that's why, I think, because you just get ostracized. And that's not to say there isn't also ideological purity on the gender critical side.
Yeah.
For example, me saying he, if anyone listening knows who I'm talking about here, it's not very obvious. But if they do know and hear me just call that person he, they might be like, no, it's a she. And, using people who use preferred pronouns. I very much try to use people's sexed pronouns. But there is also that on the other side, but it's less so. And you won't see gender critical purists going after people's jobs, but you will on the other side.
I'm not sure on pronouns. To be honest, if you say your name is Bob, call me Bob. I'll call you Bob, and I won't care. But when it starts going to toilets and pronouns, I'm not sure. Well, I know where I stand on toilets, but pronouns, I don't get why you need to do it in the first place. I think if most people would, if you say can you address me as this? I think most people would, name-wise. I think it's very different when you're saying you now need to create policies and laws based on what I feel. I think that's completely different.
I think the issue of pronouns that some people don't necessarily see straight away, and I didn't either, or at least I sort of did understand it, but I didn't know how to articulate it. But as soon as you, and this is Helen Joyce says that, and it is true, if you address someone as she, her, it tends to be the case they want to be treated as a woman all of the time.
Yeah, that's
the
very
reason
true.
the reason why they want to be
point.
called she, her is because they identify as a woman, and therefore, if that person wants to be treated as a woman and you supposedly treat them as a woman in all circumstances, then they should be allowed in the women's toilet. But if you say, it's very difficult to explain why she cannot go into the women's toilets when the reason is that he's male.
Yeah.
And so once you give the language away, it's very difficult to sort of, because language is there to be able to describe things accurately. That's what language is there for, that we can actually describe reality rather than saying things that aren't true, especially when it comes to policy and safety. You need to be able to accurately describe and give justifications to why laws exist. And if you don't have the ability to use the language to say that, then, you're stuck.
Yeah, definitely. Talking of like Helen Joyce and, these people have done amazing things. Helen Joyce, Julie Bindel, these people have like done incredible things. Who's been like the most, I don't say starstruck, but like the biggest person you've spoken to, exchanged, or whatever, like any conversation with?
I would say definitely Helen Joyce. I mean, when I I first met Helen, and had quite, considering, I was. It was around this time last year when I went to Living Freedom, which is a free speech summer school for 18 to 30-year-olds, which I'd recommend anyone go to. And Helen was speaking there, and I took my opportunity because I was reading her book at the time, and this was like when I was peaking. So to be able to
Right.
meet Helen in real life was absolutely amazing. Um, yeah, and we had a conversation. It was just amazing to meet her in real life and hear her speak in real life. Um, and she does, I mean, out of everything that Helen does, I think the most um, helpful and fundamental thing that she provides really for people to what she does is help people be able to articulate their views,
Mm.
because a lot of this stuff, I think you first realize it's wrong, you have this sort of instinct, but it's like, but I don't have the ability to say why this is wrong. And
Yeah.
she is just an amazing orator, and being able
100%.
to say things in logical terms and putting the best arguments forwards. And honestly, if I hadn't listened to, and then people say, "Oh, look, clearly," I think India Willoughby once said this about me, that he said that I'd clearly been indoctrinated because I'd explained on another podcast how I spent last summer just listening to hours of Helen on podcasts and reading her book, but also other gender critical feminists,
Mm.
and reading and listening to lots of trans rights activists and trans people themselves. But yeah, without people like Helen being able to sort of explain how it is that you argue this, and that you're not being irrational. Actually, it is very rational, and this is how the argument works in logical form, because obviously she's a mathematician, is so helpful. I mean, and another person I would say that I was absolutely starstruck to meet was Sal Grover, because as much as I was sort of peaking along last summer, the moment where I was like, I want to start talking about this, was when I became aware of Tickle versus Giggle in Australia, and
Yeah.
when the decision was given in August last year. And I remember seeing it and feeling really emotional, and I felt kind of silly because I'd never really felt emotional about something that was happening so far away.
Yeah.
But because I, at the time, felt like my eyes had been opened to this issue, and then seeing that happen, I just felt so incensed about it. And so when I met Sal in February this year, and it was amazing to meet her, because she's doing, she's fighting this fight in a place where the law is against her,
Yeah.
whereas we now know that the law has actually always been in favour of gender critical feminists in the UK, and it definitely is now. Like, no
Yeah.
one can pretend that it isn't.
I mean, I think both those people you mentioned have done amazing, amazing work. We had Helen Joyce on my podcast,
Mm.
and it's still like the most viewed one.
Mm.
And she was, yeah, her ability to explain
Yeah.
this in an incredible way. Like it's amazing.
Mm.
She also told some really like horrific stories about strip searches and what's going on in the police and stuff like this. And yeah, it's amazing to see where she's come from, a background mathematician, journalist, working for The Economist, and all this sort of stuff. And she's done, yeah, amazing, amazing work. I think for me, the one that really opened the eyes was Miriam Grossman. I don't know
I
if you,
don't know Miriam Grossman.
yeah, she was by far the first person that made me aware this is actually an issue. For me, when I first read about it, I saw it as Leah Thomas,
Leah
the
Thomas, yeah,
yeah,
the swimmer.
the swimmer. I only thought it happens in swimming, and like
Mm.
it's just like it's not really a big deal or whatever. That's still really bad, but like it's only in swimming. She made me aware that this was actually a lot bigger, and she breaks down I think what Helen does amazingly is she breaks down the argument in a very logical
Yeah.
format, and
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
destroys it, and this is incredible. I think what Miriam Grossman is incredible as she will go through the whole history
Mm.
of trans and how it's been indoctrinated into our society. So she's a clinical psychiatrist by trade, and she basically has the whole history from the 60s, 70s of how it got sold into universities, TV, media, and the whole strategy, the people behind it. And yeah, I read her book, Lost in Trans Nation, and it was like crazy. Like it was uh, almost like a historian,
Mm.
I think is the best way to describe the way she talks about the trans movement and um, how we've all been captured in it, and it's all based on lies.
Mm.
So like she just exposes it all. She bases it on a guy called John Money, who
Mhm.
had basically was the first one who was publicly. I think it was a boy who didn't who was born without a penis essentially, and then the 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 guy had said, well, we can just raise him as a female, and for a long time the public had the perception that this was a really successful thing that happened to this now girl, because they were like, the family were happy. He gave this perception and basically sold it to like the world. And what actually happened was that that boy, the original boy, was deeply unhappy, deeply depressed, was fighting against it, was more boyish than ever at school. He would stand up and pee, even though obviously women don't do that. He's never been taught that, and he was displaying really masculine behavior even as a boy. But the way everyone had been sold was that this was this nice woman, and this transition had really worked. And she talks about it in a lot more detail, a lot better than what I'm saying. But yeah, she's amazing in terms of the history behind it, which I thought was really, really fascinating. But these people have done Helen Joyce, Miriam Grossman, Sal Grove. They're doing amazing work, and I can't imagine the backlash that they would have received, especially because they were so early into doing this. I think a lot of people have come after, but I can't imagine what would have happened when they started doing it. I can't imagine like the consequences of their lives from going this early on against it. Well, it's been amazing as always, Connie, to speak to you. We did it last time, so you're gonna have to come up with something different, which is an unpopular opinion that you have that should be popular.
Oh God.
I'm trying to think of your last one, but I can't actually remember it. But yeah.
I can't remember that either. I should have thought of this before. I'm sorry. I feel very much on the spot.
It can be anything. So like we've had some serious ones recently. I'm trying to think. We had Julie Bindel she talked about how much she hates sourdough bread.
Oh, so it could be anything like that.
It can be trivial.
Okay.
It can be or it could be serious. Whatever.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. You might have to cut this out because it's really boring.
I can try and give you some inspo from other people.
I'm so
people
sorry.
say we've had people say about what's been reoccurring. Miriam Crosbyn's one was, we need to teach boys that you can be different types of boys. You can like pink and you're a boy and blah blah. That's normal.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to really think for this to be interesting. I'm so sorry.
Well, you've reminded me. I've got to definitely tell that.
Make sure.
In advance.
Please.
I've
told me before.
I've got to tell him before.
I literally can't. I have opinions, but it's not necessarily like anything controversial that should be, because there's lots of things that I haven't really made my mind up about. And so when I said to you, as long as it's within this remit, because sometimes people might ask me something, I'm like, I actually don't know what I think about this yet, and I don't want to talk about it on authority.
That is a really
actually, okay, this is a good thing actually. I would say that it's okay to change your mind, and that there's humility in changing your mind, and actually it's very impressive when people can admit to now believing that you were wrong in the past. Yeah,
I think that's a really good one, and it's your point you said just before you just said that. I think it's okay to say that you don't have an opinion.
Yeah,
I think I'm definitely guilty of it, and I think but I think I have quite an open mind, so I'm open to changing. But I know so many people have opinions on stuff that they definitely haven't read that much into. They have such opinion. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. I don't think it's possible. That's why I get really like annoyed at some of the celebrities in or if it's Lewis Hamilton. I always have a thing with Lewis Hamilton. I think he's like the best driver in history, like incredible Formula 1 driver. And it's just like, if there's a lot of hypocrisy with him in terms of when he talks about how much he's in favor of climate change and just stop all this stuff, and it's like, you literally drive oil-driven car like for a living. But I also think, like, how can you have fully formed opinions on so many things when you are the number one at your craft and you are the top of the top and you train 24/7 and you're an absolute animal in that field? And how can you then have such strong opinions on other things that
Mhm.
there's not that much time in a day? Like I find it really weird in terms of how people do that. So I think it's a really good thing not to
Mm.
have an opinion on everything.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but yeah, oh, good speaking to you, Connie.
You too.
Thank you.